Hey folks, I'm excited to share some stories with you today that I've written myself. Whether you're a long-time follower or just joining us, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these tales. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe if you're new here. Let's dive in, and I hope you enjoy. I bought an old laptop from the dark web. I found government cheat codes to get rich, and now FBI is after me. I never intended to delve into the dark web. I was always a curious guy, sure, but there was something inherently terrifying about that shadowy part of the internet that kept me at bay. But one night, after one too many beers and feeling particularly invincible, I decided to take the plunge. A few clicks here and there, and I was deeper than I ever expected to go. It started with a random post on a hidden forum. Old laptop for sale contains secrets worth millions. It sounded like a scam, but the comments were filled with cryptic praises and bizarre testimonies about life-changing fortunes. Against my better judgment, I reached out to the seller. He didn't ask for much, just a couple of Bitcoin, which seemed like a steal for whatever secrets he was peddling. The laptop arrived a week later, packed in a plain, unmarked box. It was old, a dusty, beat-up Dell from the early 2000s. It looked like it had been through hell and back. The screen had a crack in the corner, and the keyboard was missing a few keys. I almost regretted spending the money until I powered it up. The first thing I noticed was the wallpaper, a grainy black and white photo of what looked like a government building, but something was off. The windows were boarded up, and there were strange symbols spray painted on the walls. I brushed it off as some hacker's idea of a joke and started digging through the files. There were folders upon folders, all named with random strings of numbers and letters. The first few I opened were filled with mundane documents, tax records, personal letters, stuff that seemed private but not particularly useful. But then I found a folder named GOV_hacks. Inside, there were files detailing various ways to manipulate government databases, how to erase your criminal record, change your identity, and, most interestingly, how to reroute large sums of money from untraceable government accounts into personal offshore banks. It was a treasure trove of illegal knowledge. I decided to test it out, just for kicks. I followed the steps in one of the files, targeting a small account to avoid detection. To my shock, it worked. Within hours, I had a significant amount of money transferred to a newly created account. It felt surreal, like a twisted video game where I had just unlocked a cheat code. I thought I was smart about it, covering my tracks and using VPNs to mask my activities. But the moment I withdrew a small amount to test if the money was real, I knew I had made a grave mistake. The very next day, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street from my apartment. It could have been a coincidence, but my paranoia kicked in. Then the phone call started, unknown numbers at all hours of the day and night. At first, I ignored them, but one night, curiosity got the best of me. I answered, and a deep, distorted voice on the other end simply said, "We know what you did. We're coming." I panicked. I tried to erase everything, but the laptop wouldn't cooperate. Files that I had deleted reappeared, and new folders with disturbing content began to populate the desktop. Pictures of me, taken from outside my window, appeared one by one. Each picture was closer than the last, until the final one was a shot of me sleeping in my bed, taken from inside my apartment. I ran to the police, but they didn't believe me. Without concrete evidence, they dismissed it as a prank. I tried to ditch the laptop, throwing it into the river, but it was back on my desk the next morning, dripping wet but functional. Then things escalated. One night, I woke up to the sound of my door creaking open. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a baseball bat, and crept toward the noise. In the darkness, I could make out a figure standing in my living room, wearing a suit and sunglasses, like some kind of cliché government agent. Before I could react, he spoke in the same distorted voice from the phone. "You should have stayed away." I swung the bat, but he disappeared like a shadow. I called the police again, but they found nothing, and their skepticism turned to suspicion. Now, I'm a person of interest in a series of bizarre incidents, and the money I transferred is frozen. My accounts are flagged, and I'm on the verge of losing everything. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see that figure, feel his presence. I hear whispers in the dark, words I can't understand but fill me with dread. I know they're watching, waiting for me to make a mistake, and I fear it's only a matter of time before they make their move. I'm writing this as a warning. Stay away from the dark web, and if you ever find an old laptop for sale with promises of secrets, do yourself a favor and destroy it. Burn it, smash it, whatever you have to do. Because once you open that door, there's no going back. Since my last post, things have gotten worse, much worse. I hoped that maybe sharing my story would somehow lessen the terror, maybe make me feel a bit safer, but it didn't. If anything, it feels like I've painted a target on my back. After that last encounter, I tried to go about my life as normally as possible, but it's hard to act normal when you're being hunted. I barely slept, jumping at every little noise. The black SUV was gone, but I knew they were still watching. My paranoia was at an all-time high. One night, I decided to stay at a friend's place. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, just packed a bag and left. I thought maybe a change of scenery would help me clear my head. My friend Mark had a spare room, and he was the type of guy who didn't ask too many questions, which was perfect. The first night at Mark's was the best sleep I'd had in weeks. I thought maybe I was finally safe, but the relief was short-lived. The second night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of my phone buzzing. Groggy and annoyed, I reached for it, expecting another spam call. Instead, it was a message from an unknown number. Nice try. My heart sank. I looked around the room, half expecting to see someone standing there. The shadows seemed to move, mocking my fear. I got up and checked the locks, reassured myself that everything was secure. But I knew deep down it didn't matter. They could get to me, wherever I was. In the morning, I told Mark I had to leave. He seemed confused, maybe even a bit hurt, but he didn't press the issue. I thanked him and headed back to my apartment, feeling more defeated than ever. When I walked in, my heart nearly stopped. The laptop was there, sitting on my desk, turned on and humming quietly. I could have sworn I had thrown it into the river. This time, the desktop background had changed. It was a live feed of me walking into my apartment, a split-second delay showing my every move. I slammed the lid shut, but the screen stayed on, the feed still active. Panicking, I yanked the power cord out, but it kept running. Finally, I grabbed a hammer and smashed it to pieces, the plastic and glass shattering under the force of my blows. For a moment, I felt victorious, but then my phone buzzed again. Another message. "You can't hide from us." I dropped the hammer my hands shaking uncontrollably. The walls felt like they were closing in. I stumbled to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, trying to calm down, but when I looked up, my reflection was distorted, like I was seeing myself through a funhouse mirror. My face twisted into a grotesque grin that wasn't mine. I stumbled back, hitting the wall and sinking to the floor. It was then that I realized this wasn't just some hacker messing with me. This was something far more sinister. I knew I had to get out of there, but where could I go? Who could I turn to? My thoughts raced, and I decided to reach out to an old acquaintance who claimed to have connections in the cyber world. If anyone could help me, it was him. I called him up, and to my surprise, he agreed to meet. We arranged to meet at a secluded coffee shop on the outskirts of the town. When I arrived, he was already there, looking more paranoid than I felt. We exchanged pleasantries, but I could tell he was nervous. "What did you get yourself into, man?" he asked, leaning in close. I explained everything, from the dark web laptop to the disturbing encounters. He listened intently, nodding occasionally. "You're in deep shit," he said bluntly. "These aren't just hackers. This sounds like some deep state level stuff. You need to disappear." Disappear? The thought hadn't crossed my mind. I had a life, a job, friends. But what choice did I have? He gave me a list of things to do. Get rid of my phone, avoid using any electronic devices, stay off the grid. He even suggested a few places where I could lay low for a while. It all sounded like something out of a spy movie, but I was desperate. That night, I packed a small bag with essentials and ditched everything else. I withdrew what little cash I had left and caught the first bus out of town. As I traveled, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Maybe, just maybe, I could outrun whatever was after me, but deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. I could feel their eyes on me, even in the most remote places. They had resources far beyond my understanding, and it was only a matter of time before they caught up. For now, I can only keep moving and hope that I find a way out of this nightmare. If you're reading this, take my advice. Stay away from the dark web. Curiosity can be deadly, and some secrets are best left buried. I've been on the run for weeks now. I've lost track of time and barely remember what it feels like to have a normal life. Every day is a new location, a new face, but the same gnawing fear that I'm being watched, hunted. I've learned to survive on little sleep, always half alert, always ready to bolt at a moment's notice. After leaving town, I headed to a remote cabin in the mountains that my friend had suggested. It belonged to a contact of his, someone who owed him a favor and was willing to let me lay low for a while. The cabin was off the grid, no electricity, no phone lines, just a wood stove for heat and a well for water. It was primitive, but it felt safe. For the first time in ages, I allowed myself to relax, just a little. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time chopping wood, gathering food, and trying to forget the nightmare that had become my life. But then, strange things started happening. It began with the animals. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sounds of them scurrying around the cabin, scratching at the walls. One morning, I found a dead rabbit on the porch, its eyes gouged out, its body twisted unnaturally. I buried it, trying to push away the thoughts that maybe it was a warning. Then the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the voices were too clear, too deliberate. They'd call my name mockingly, always just out of sight. One night, I woke up to find my own handwriting on the walls, messages I didn't remember writing. You can't escape. We're coming for you. It's too late. My sanity was unraveling, and I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed my bag and headed to the nearest town, miles away. Hitchhiking was my only option, and I managed to catch a ride with a trucker heading in the same direction. He was a gruff, no-nonsense type, but he didn't ask too many questions, which suited me fine. As we drove through the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of headlights in the distance, but they'd disappear as soon as I looked directly at them. We stopped at a diner in the middle of nowhere, and I went inside to grab some food while the trucker fueled up. The place was almost empty, just a few locals nursing their coffees and a tired-looking waitress behind the counter. I ordered a sandwich and sat at a booth near the back, trying to keep a low profile. That's when I saw him. Sitting at the counter was the same man from my apartment, the one in the suit and sunglasses. He was stirring his coffee, looking straight at me. My heart raced, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. How had he found me here? I ducked my head, hoping he hadn't seen me, but it was too late. He stood up and walked towards me, a predatory smile on his lips. "You thought you could run?" he said, sitting down across from me. His voice was calm, almost amused. "We have eyes everywhere." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, placing it on the table. It looked like a phone, but there were no buttons, just a black screen. "You've been quite the nuisance," he continued, tapping the device. The screen lit up, showing a live feed of me sitting in the diner. "But it's time to end this." Before I could react, he pressed a button on the device, and pain shot through my head, blinding and all-consuming. I fell to the floor, writhing in agony, my vision swimming with dark spots. The last thing I heard before everything went black was his voice, cold and detached. "Goodbye." When I woke up, I was in a dark, unfamiliar room, tied to a chair. The air was damp and musty, and the only light came from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. I struggled against the ropes, but they were too tight. Panic set in as I realized I was completely at their mercy. The door creaked open, and two men walked in, both wearing suits and sunglasses. They looked identical, like they were cut from the same mold. One of them stepped forward, holding a syringe. "You've been chosen for a special experiment," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Consider it an honor." I tried to scream, to beg for mercy, but the gag in my mouth muffled my cries. The man approached, and I felt the sharp sting of the needle in my arm. Darkness swallowed me once again. When I regained consciousness, I was back in my apartment. Everything looked the same, but there was an eerie silence that felt wrong. I checked my phone, but there were no messages, no missed calls. It was as if the last few weeks had never happened, but I knew better. The laptop was gone, and so was the money. My accounts were empty, my identity erased. I was a ghost, living in the shadows, constantly looking over my shoulder. They had let me go, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they came back. Now, I live in constant fear, moving from place to place, never staying in one spot for too long. The dark web, the secrets, the money, it wasn't worth it. I'm sharing my story as a final warning. If you value your sanity, your life, stay away from the dark web. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. I thought I was done for. After everything I went through, waking up in my apartment felt like some cruel joke. At first, I tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, it had all been a nightmare, but the scars on my arm from the injection and the gnawing sense of dread told me otherwise. I tried to piece my life back together. I got a job under a fake name, rented a cheap room in a rundown part of town, and tried to stay under the radar. But the paranoia never left. Every time I saw a black SUV, my heart would race. Every unknown number that called made my stomach churn. I was living in a constant state of fear, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then one night, it did. I was walking home from work, taking my usual shortcut through an alley, when I noticed something strange. The alley was too quiet, even for this part of town. I slowed my pace, my senses on high alert. As I neared the end of the alley, I saw him, the same man from my apartment and the diner, standing in the shadows waiting for me. Panic surged through me, and I turned to run, but he was faster. He grabbed me by the arm and slammed me against the wall, his grip like iron. I struggled, but it was no use. His face was inches from mine, and I could see the cold, calculated look in his eyes. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "We let you go for a reason. What do you want from me?" I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. He smiled, a chilling, predatory smile. "You still have something we need." Before I could respond, everything went black again. I woke up in a different room this time, a sterile, windowless cell with a single metal door. My head throbbed, and my vision was blurry, but I could make out a figure sitting in the corner. As my eyes adjusted, I recognized him, the same man, my tormentor. "Welcome back," he said, his tone mocking. "We've decided to give you another chance to cooperate." I didn't respond, my mind racing with fear and confusion. "We need access to the files on the laptop," he continued. "You managed to hide them well, but we know they're still out there. You're going to help us retrieve them." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I destroyed the laptop." He laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You really think it's that simple? The files are backed up on a secure server. We need the encryption key, and we know you have it." I racked my brain, trying to remember any detail that could help me, but it was all a blur, a jumbled mess of fear and panic. "Your cooperation will be rewarded," he said, standing up and walking towards me. "Resist, and there will be consequences." With that, he left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I had no idea what encryption key he was talking about. The files on the laptop were a distant memory, something I had tried to forget, but now, it seemed, they were the key to my survival. Days passed in a haze of isolation and interrogation. They questioned me relentlessly, using every tactic they could to break me. Sleep deprivation, psychological manipulation, threats, but I genuinely had no idea what they wanted. The more I insisted I didn't have the key, the more ruthless they became. One night, after a particularly brutal session, I was left alone in my cell, battered and broken. I was on the brink of giving up, my mind a swirling vortex of despair. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, coming from the vents. "At least pretend you remember." I sat up, straining to hear more. The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. "They'll never stop if you don't give them something." Desperation gave me clarity. I realized I needed to play their game, to give them just enough to buy myself some time. The next time they questioned me, I told them I needed access to a computer, that the key was stored in an encrypted email account. It was a gamble, but it seemed to work. They brought me to a small room with a laptop, closely monitoring my every move. I typed in random passwords, pretending to search for the key. Minutes turned into hours, and I could feel their patience wearing thin. Just as they were about to pull the plug, I made a breakthrough. A random string of characters that miraculously unlocked an encrypted file. It wasn't the key they were looking for, but it was enough to keep them at bay for now. Weeks turned into months, and I continued to play their game, giving them just enough to keep them from completely breaking me. I knew it was only a matter of time before they realized I was stalling. I needed a plan, a way to escape this nightmare once and for all. Late one night, as I lay on the cold, hard floor of my cell, the whisper returned. There's a way out. You just have to be brave enough to take it. I had nothing left to lose. The next day, during another interrogation session, I made my move. I attacked my captor with every ounce of strength I had left, catching him off guard. I grabbed his keycard and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. Alarms blared as I navigated the maze of corridors, desperately searching for an exit. Just as I was about to give up hope, I found a door marked "Emergency Exit." I burst through it, the cold night air hitting me like a slap to the face. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing in a heap on the side of the road. I didn't know where I was or how far I had come, but I was free. For now, at least. I write this from a cheap motel room, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for them to find me again. I know it's only a matter of time before they catch up, but I'm not giving up. If you're reading this, know that the dark web is a gateway to unimaginable horrors. Stay away, for your own sake. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some doors should never be opened. I've been on the run for so long now, I've lost count of the days. Each one blends into the next, a blur of cheap motels, fast food, and paranoia. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. They're always one step behind, nipping at my heels, reminding me that no matter how far I run, I'll never truly be free. I've moved to a different city every week, using fake names and cash for everything. But it's a temporary solution, a band-aid on a bullet wound. They always find me. The black SUVs, the unknown numbers, the whispers in the dark. They're relentless. One night, I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I was tired of running, tired of hiding. I needed to end this one way or another. I took a bus to a city I'd never been to before, a place where I hoped I could find some answers, a place where I could confront the nightmare head-on. I arrived in the middle of the night, the city lights casting eerie shadows on the empty streets. I found a seedy motel and checked in under a new alias and settled in for what I hoped would be my last night on the run. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with plans and fears. As dawn broke, I packed my bag and headed to an internet cafe. I needed to access the dark web one last time to see if I could find any trace of the laptop, the files, anything that could give me a clue about who was behind this. I logged in and navigated through the maze of hidden sites, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. After hours of searching, I found a forum thread discussing the laptop. The posts were cryptic, filled with warnings and conspiracy theories, but one comment stood out. It mentioned a place, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, rumored to be a hub for dark web activities. It was a long shot, but I had no other leads. I took a cab to the warehouse, my stomach twisting with fear. The building was derelict, its windows boarded up and walls covered in graffiti. I forced myself to take a deep breath and approached the door, which hung loosely on its hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. I wandered through the dark, empty halls, my footsteps echoing ominously. I reached a large room filled with broken furniture and scattered papers. In the corner, I saw it, an old laptop, eerily similar to the one I had bought months ago. My heart raced as I approached it, half expecting it to come to life. I powered it on, and to my surprise, it worked. The screen flickered to life, displaying the same cracked government building wallpaper. I navigated through the files, searching for anything that could explain what was happening to me. That's when I found it. A folder labeled Project Pandora. The files inside detailed a covert government experiment aimed at manipulating reality through digital means. It was all there. Mind control, surveillance, psychological torture. And the laptop was a key component. A prototype designed to test the boundaries of human perception. I realized with horror that I had been a pawn in a twisted game, a guinea pig in an experiment gone horribly wrong. Before I could process everything, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see a group of men in suits, their faces expressionless. Leading them was the same man who had tormented me from the beginning. He smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "You've gone too far," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "It's time to end this." I backed away, clutching the laptop to my chest. "Why me?" I demanded. "Why did you do this to me?" "You were chosen," he replied simply. "An ordinary man, thrust into extraordinary circumstances. We needed to see how far you could be pushed." "You're monsters," I spat, my voice trembling with rage. He shrugged. "Perhaps, but it's time to say goodbye." Before I could react, he pulled out a device, similar to the one he had used before. Pain exploded in my head, and I fell to the ground, writhing in agony. The last thing I saw was his face, cold and unfeeling, as everything went black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines. The room was sterile, white walls and fluorescent lights. A nurse entered, her face kind but professional. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, checking my vitals. "You were found unconscious in an abandoned warehouse. No ID, no personal belongings." "What happened to me?" I asked, my voice weak. She shook her head. "I don't know. You're a John Doe as far as we're concerned, but you're safe now." Safe. The word felt hollow. I knew they were still out there, watching, waiting. The experiment might be over, but the nightmare was far from finished. I had to stay vigilant, always on the move, always looking over my shoulder. I'm writing this from the hospital, my hands shaking as I type. I don't know how much longer I have before they find me again. If you're reading this, heed my warning. The dark web is a Pandora's box, and some secrets are better left buried. Curiosity isn't worth the price you'll pay. Stay safe and stay away from the darkness. The dark web ritual that promised eternal life. I've always had a fascination with the bizarre and the unexplained. It started with ghost stories as a kid, but as I got older, my curiosity led me to darker corners of the internet. That's how I ended up on the dark web. For those who don't know, The dark web isn't just some shady online market. It's a labyrinth of illicit activities, forums, and, as I discovered, rituals that promise the impossible. One night, I was deep in one of these forums, sifting through threads about haunted objects and cursed videotapes, when I stumbled upon a post titled, "Eternal Life Guaranteed, Must Be Brave." It seemed like a joke at first, something cooked up by an overzealous horror fan, but as I read the post, it became clear that the author was dead serious. They described a ritual that, if followed precisely, would grant eternal life. The instructions were bizarre, involving ancient symbols, blood offerings, and a secluded location. My heart pounded as I read through the detailed steps, each one more unsettling than the last. But what really caught my attention was the final note. Those who succeed will transcend death. Those who fail will wish for it. I couldn't get it out of my head. The idea of eternal life, of transcending death, was intoxicating. After a week of obsessing over it, I decided to try it. I was alone, with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Or so I thought. The first step was to gather the materials. This involved a lot of unusual items: black candles, a ceremonial dagger, and a few ingredients that were hard to come by. The most disturbing requirement was fresh human blood. The instructions didn't specify how much, but the implication was clear. It had to be significant. I debated whether to back out, but my curiosity and the pull of what could be kept me going. I managed to source the items, some through dubious channels. The blood was the hardest part. I considered stealing from a blood bank, but eventually I found a willing participant on the dark web. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer any answers. The next part of the ritual required a specific location: an abandoned house at the edge of town, rumored to be haunted. I had driven past it countless times, always feeling a chill as I looked at its decaying structure. It was the perfect setting for something like this. The night of the ritual, I packed my car with the items and drove to the house. The place was eerily quiet, surrounded by a dense forest that seemed to swallow all sound. I made my way inside, the floorboards creaking under my weight, and set up in the main room. The instructions were clear. Draw a circle with the ceremonial dagger, light the candles, and place the offerings inside the circle. The air grew heavy as I lit each candle, their flickering flames casting unsettling shadows on the walls. I could feel a presence, something ancient and malevolent, watching me. I cut my hand with the dagger, letting the blood drip onto the floor. The pain was sharp but bearable. I chanted the words written in the post, struggling with the unfamiliar language. The room seemed to vibrate with energy, the shadows growing darker, more defined. Then came the final step, invoking the entity. The post had warned that this part would be the most dangerous. I called out the name written in the instructions, my voice trembling. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped sharply, and the candles flickered violently. A figure materialized in the center of the circle, cloaked in darkness. Its eyes were empty voids, sucking in the light around them. It spoke in a voice that seemed to resonate in my bones, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "You have summoned me," it said. "Do you seek eternal life?" I nodded, unable to speak. The entity moved closer, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. It reached out a hand, and I felt an icy chill spread through my body as it touched me. "The price is your soul," it whispered. "Are you willing to pay?" I hesitated, the weight of what I was doing finally sinking in. but I had come this far, and the allure of eternal life was too strong. I nodded again, my breath fogging in the cold air. The entity's grip tightened, and I felt a searing pain in my chest. It was as if it was ripping something out of me, something vital. I screamed, the sound echoing through the empty house. The pain was unbearable, and I felt myself slipping away. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The entity released me, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. I felt different, lighter somehow. The entity looked down at me, its empty eyes boring into mine. "You are now eternal," it said. "But remember, there is no escape from the consequences of your actions." With that, it vanished, leaving me alone in the dark, cold room. I had done it. I had achieved eternal life. But as I lay there, recovering from the ordeal, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. As I regained my strength and made my way home, the gravity of what I had done began to sink in. My body felt different, more resilient, but there was an unsettling sensation deep inside me, like a part of me was missing. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes. I no longer needed to sleep or eat, yet I felt an insatiable hunger that gnawed at me from within. I tried to ignore it, hoping it was just a side effect of the ritual, but the hunger grew, a constant reminder that something was very wrong. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard whispers. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the voices grew louder, more insistent. They spoke of dark things, urging me to do unspeakable acts. I covered my ears, trying to block them out, but they only grew louder, echoing in my mind. Desperate for answers, I returned to the forum where I had found the ritual, but the post was gone, and so was the user who had posted it. I searched for any information about the entity I had summoned, but there was nothing. It was as if it had never existed. The whispers continued, and the hunger became unbearable. I found myself drawn to the dark web again, searching for anything that could help me understand what was happening. I stumbled upon a thread about people who had performed similar rituals. Their stories were eerily similar to mine, but none of them had survived long enough to provide answers. One post, however, caught my attention. It was from someone claiming to have found a way to end the eternal life granted by the ritual. The instructions were vague, involving another summoning and a blood sacrifice, but it was my only hope. I gathered the materials again, this time feeling a sense of dread rather than excitement. The hunger gnawed at me, the whispers urging me to hurry. I returned to the abandoned house, now feeling like a prisoner rather than a curious explorer. I set up the ritual again, following the instructions to the letter. As I chanted the words, the air grew cold and the candles flickered. The same entity appeared, its empty eyes staring into mine. "You wish to undo what you have done," it said, its voice sending chills down my spine. "The price is blood." I had expected this. I had come prepared. I pulled out a knife and without hesitation sliced my palm open, letting the blood drip onto the floor. The entity watched, its eyes gleaming with malevolent hunger. But something went wrong. As the blood pooled on the floor, the entity let out a shriek that pierced my ears. The candles went out, plunging the room into darkness. I felt a force pull me to the ground, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. "You cannot escape," the entity hissed, its voice echoing in the darkness. "You are mine." Pain shot through my body as the entity's grip tightened. I screamed, crashing against the invisible force holding me down. The room spun, and I felt myself being pulled into a void, a place of endless darkness and torment. I don't know how long I was there, trapped in that nightmarish realm. Time seemed to lose all meaning. The whispers became my constant companions, driving me to the brink of madness. The hunger gnawed at me, an endless torment that no amount of blood could satisfy. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I was back in the abandoned house, lying on the cold, hard floor. The candles were out and the room was silent. I felt different, weaker somehow. The hunger was still there, but it was muted, a dull ache rather than a ravenous beast. I had survived, but at what cost? The entity's words echoed in my mind. You are mine. I was no longer the same person. The hunger, the whispers, the darkness, they were all a part of me now. I left the house, vowing never to return. But the memories lingered, a constant reminder of the price I had paid for my curiosity. I had sought eternal life, but what I had found was something far worse. And now I was trapped in a living nightmare, with no escape in sight. Back at home, I tried to resume a normal life, but it was impossible. The whispers never stopped, and the hunger gnawed at me incessantly. I couldn't go to work, couldn't socialize, couldn't do anything that had once been a part of my routine. I was trapped in my apartment, a prisoner of my own mind. The hunger, though dulled, was still a constant presence. It craved something I couldn't provide, something beyond food or drink. I tried to distract myself with TV and the internet, but nothing could drown out the whispers. They grew more insistent each day, driving me to the edge of sanity. One night, as I lay in bed, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was as if something was clawing its way out. I doubled over, clutching my chest, gasping for breath. The pain was unbearable, and I felt a warm, sticky fluid on my hands. Blood, my blood. I stumbled to the bathroom, flipping on the light. In the mirror, I saw a horrific sight. My chest was bleeding profusely, but not from a wound. The blood seemed to be seeping through my skin like sweat. Panic set in, and I tried to wash it off, but the blood kept coming. Then the whispers changed. They became clearer, more distinct. They were no longer just in my head. They were coming from my own mouth. I watched, in horror, as my reflection in the mirror twisted and distorted. The face in the glass, no longer mine, but a grotesque mockery. You are ours, the face said, its mouth moving in sync with mine. You belong to us now. I screamed, smashing the mirror with my fist. Shards of glass flew everywhere, cutting into my skin. The pain brought me back to reality, and I realized I needed help. But who could I turn to? Who would believe my story? I tried to call a friend, but as soon as they answered, the whispers grew louder, drowning out their voice. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't speak. I hung up, tears streaming down my face. I was alone in this. Days turned into weeks, and I lost all sense of time. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. The hunger grew stronger, and I began to fear what I might do to satiate it. The whispers urged me to feed, to find blood. They promised relief, even if temporary. Desperation drove me back to the dark web. I found a chat room where people discussed their own encounters with the supernatural. I told my story, hoping someone would have an answer. Most people dismissed me as a troll, but one user, Soul Seeker, reached out privately. I know what you're going through, they said. I've been there. There's a way to stop it, but it's not easy. I clung to their words, desperate for any glimmer of hope. Soulseeker explained that the only way to break the curse was to transfer it to someone else, a ritual similar to the one I had performed, but this time with a willing participant. The thought of condemning someone else to this hell was abhorrent, but I was losing my mind. The whispers grew more frantic, urging me to accept Soulseeker's offer. They provided detailed instructions, and I knew what I had to do. I needed a victim. The thought made me sick, but the hunger was unbearable. I found someone on a dating app, someone who seemed lonely and desperate. We chatted for a few days, and I arranged to meet them at my apartment. The night of the meeting, I prepared everything. The candles, the dagger, the circle all set up in my living room. When they arrived, I could see the curiosity and excitement in their eyes. They thought this was some sort of game, a thrill they couldn't resist. I felt a pang of guilt as I led them inside, but the hunger was overwhelming. I explained that we were going to perform a ritual, something fun and mysterious. They laughed, agreeing to play along. As we stood in the circle, I began the chant, my voice trembling. They followed my lead, repeating the words. The air grew cold and the candles flickered. I could feel the presence of the entity, waiting, watching. I took the dagger, hesitating for just a moment before slicing my hand. The blood dripped onto the floor, and the whispers surged, encouraging me. My victim looked nervous but stayed in place, unaware of the danger. The final step was to cut them, to complete the transfer. My hand shook as I brought the dagger to their skin. Their eyes widened in fear, realizing too late that this was no game. I closed my eyes, unable to watch as I made the cut. Their scream echoed in the room, mingling with the whispers. The entity appeared, its form shifting and writhing in the candlelight. It reached out, touching my victim, and I felt the hunger begin to fade. The entity turned to me, its eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "It is done," it said. "You are free." The relief was immediate, the whispers silenced, the hunger gone. But as I looked at my victim, lying on the floor, bleeding and trembling, I knew I had traded one horror for another. I had condemned an innocent person to my fate, and the guilt would haunt me forever. Free from the hunger and the whispers, I tried to move on with my life, but the guilt was unbearable. The face of the person I had sacrificed haunted my every waking moment. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. The price of my freedom was too high. I tried to reach out to Soulseeker, but their account had disappeared, leaving me with no answers. I scoured the dark web for any trace of them, but it was as if they had never existed. I was alone, left to deal with the consequences of my actions. The whispers were gone, but my mind was still a prison. I saw my victim's face everywhere, in the mirror, in my dreams, in the faces of strangers on the street. Their screams echoed in my ears, a constant reminder of what I had done. I couldn't live with myself. I turned to alcohol, trying to numb the pain, but it only made things worse. The guilt consumed me, eating away at my sanity. I became a shell of my former self, haunted by the ghost of the person I had sacrificed. One night, in a drunken stupor, I decided to visit the abandoned house one last time. I needed closure, needed to understand what I had done. The drive was a blur, and I barely remembered how I got there. The house loomed in the darkness, a monument to my mistakes. I stumbled inside, the familiar creak of the floorboards greeting me. The air was cold, and the sense of dread was palpable. I made my way to the room where it all began, the memories flooding back, the candles, the blood, the entity. It was all still so vivid. I stood in the center of the room, staring at the spot where the ritual had taken place. The guilt was overwhelming, and I collapsed to the floor, sobbing. I had traded one life for another, and the weight of that decision was crushing. As I lay there, I felt a presence in the room. The air grew colder, and I knew I was not alone. The entity appeared, its form more defined than before. It looked down at me, its eyes filled with something resembling pity. "You cannot escape the consequences," it said. "You may be free, but your soul is still tainted." I looked up, tears streaming down my face. "What do I do?" I pleaded. "How do I make this right?" The entity's gaze softened, and it knelt beside me. "There is no undoing what has been done, but you can seek redemption. Help those who are lost. Guide them away from the darkness. It is the only way to find peace." The words resonated with me, and I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. I nodded, determined to find a way to atone for my actions. The entity faded, leaving me alone in the darkness. I knew what I had to do. I would dedicate my life to helping others, to preventing them from making the same mistakes I had. It was the only way to find some semblance of peace. Over the next few years, I threw myself into helping others. I joined online forums, warning people about the dangers of the dark web, sharing my story in the hopes of preventing others from falling into the same trap. I volunteered at shelters, worked with at-risk youth, and did everything I could to make amends. The guilt never fully went away, but it became more manageable. I found solace in helping others, in knowing that I was making a difference. The face of my victim still haunted me, but I used that pain as a driving force to keep going. I never performed another ritual, never sought out the supernatural again. The dark web was a place I avoided at all costs, knowing the horrors it held. I had learned my lesson the hard way, and I was determined to keep others from making the same mistakes. The whispers never returned, and the hunger was gone for good. I was free, but the price of that freedom was something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. I had found a way to live with my actions, to seek redemption, and in doing so, I had found a sense of peace. I don't know if I'll ever truly be forgiven for what I did, but I've learned to forgive myself to some extent. Life goes on, and I found a way to make the most of it. The dark web ritual that promised eternal life had given me something far more valuable, a chance to make amends and to help others avoid the same fate. I share my story, not for sympathy, but as a warning. The allure of eternal life, of transcending death, is a dangerous temptation. It promises much, but takes more than you can ever imagine. If you find yourself drawn to the darkness, remember my story and think twice. Some things are better left alone, and if you ever hear whispers in the night, urging you to seek the impossible, remember that the price is always higher than you think. Be careful what you wish for, because once you step into the darkness, there's no turning back. That's my story. It's not a happy one, but it's mine. And if it saves even one person from making the same mistake, then it was worth telling. Stay safe out there, and remember, some doors are better left unopened